Real stories of werewolves, of dogman from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
Scary Stories presents Dogman's Alive 4th Special. Starring werewolves, starring monsters. Executive produced by John Cardigan. Happy Independence Day, Dogman.
The 4th of July. Allegheny. Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got a Dogman story for you that took place on July 4th, at least according to a story passed down in my family. The area where it supposedly happened is now a park called North Park, located just north of Pittsburgh. But when this happened, my family lived on that land and it hadn't been taken over by the state yet. I'm not clear if they actually owned the land, but I know they built a house on it, deep in the woods, and lived there, mainly subsisting through hunting, for almost 2 generations before getting kicked out. The main character in this story is a guy named Carol, or Carl, depending on who is narrating. I'm not sure of his precise relationship to me, but I would think he was probably a great-great-great uncle of mine. At any rate, this allegedly happened when Carl was a boy. He was part of the first family to live in the area, and this had to be back around the end of the 1800s or beginning of the 1900s. Carl wanted badly to celebrate the 4th of July by blowing up fireworks, but his father, whose name I'm not sure of, was very against this, as he had lost a finger when he was young due to a large firecracker going off in his hand. Because of this, none of his children were allowed to play with or even watch others play with fireworks of any kind. This made Carl very sad, and he felt it was unpatriotic as well. Because of all this, when Carl could afford to buy a firecracker or two, which was rare, he would then hide it in his growing collection up on top and in back of his closet. On July 4th, he had plans to sneak off to a clearing in the woods that his family was unaware of and set them off for himself. He hoped he could have his patriotic celebration without upsetting his father or mother and without getting into trouble. The one flaw in his plan was that he didn't take into account that someone else might object to loud explosions in those woods, with that someone else being the Dogman. Now, my family still lives near Pittsburgh, so this story got passed down as a cautionary tale. We were told this so that we would behave. Don't go wandering in the woods, or the werewolf man will get you. Don't disobey your parents, because the werewolf man knows how to deal with misbehaving children. That sort of thing. You know, do your homework or I'll put you out in the woods for the werewolf man to get. I never used to really believe it was an actual thing until I saw stuff online about the Dogman, and that was maybe in the early 2000s. So now, in retrospect, I'm glad I usually listened to my parents and usually obeyed them, so that I never had to find out for myself whether it was real or not. But at any rate, our family had a very specific boogeyman, and that was what everyone now calls the Dogman. So my ancestor Carl snuck out by himself away from the family just before dawn on July 4th one year when the sky was still mostly dark. He went to his rocky clearing and set off one of the 4 firecrackers he had managed to buy. It made a lot of noise, more than he expected, and he wondered if it was loud enough to have awakened his parents. Either way, he clapped and hooted in happiness that he had finally gotten to blow something up. As Carl began getting ready to light the second one, he heard a rustling in the trees surrounding the clearing. Stopping what he was doing, he looked around. It wasn't coming from the direction of his family's house, so it wouldn't have been his father. He figured it had to have been an animal of some sort, but since it was quiet now, maybe the animal had left. Bending down, he lit the fuse of the second firecracker and ran away as fast as he could. Bam! Just as loud as the first one, but somehow not as exciting. He decided to light the last 2 at the same time to try to get one last big blast out of his morning. Carl tied the wicks of the 2 firecrackers together and struck a match to light them with. But he heard sound coming from the woods again, and he put out the match. Looking around, Carl could not see what was causing the noises, but he was growing more and more nervous about being there. While standing and looking, he now thought he heard sounds coming from several directions. At first he considered leaving the last 2 fireworks where they were and running home. But then, at the last second, he decided to follow through with setting them both off at once and then to run on home. Lighting the fuse and running a few steps back, Carl heard a much louder sound coming from behind him and another sound to his right. He turned and watched his fireworks on the rock in the center of the field, sizzling and nearly ready to blow. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw probably the last thing in the world that he wanted to see at that particular moment. It was his father, emerging from the woods, looking more than a little angry. Carl thought about trying to put the fireworks out before they exploded right in front of his father, and he took a step toward them. It was too late, but in looking at the firecrackers, he saw something else past them that was possibly even more frightening than his angry dad. He saw the werewolf man. According to my family, the werewolf man was taller than the tallest bear and stronger than the strongest dog. It had tall, pointed, dog-like ears and dark fur. Its tail was so long and straight that he could use it as a whip to subdue his prey without getting his hands dirty. He walked on his hind legs and could therefore either attack or carry things with his front paws. This made the werewolf man more formidable than most animals of the forest, since he could fight like an animal, and then he could fight like a man. He was ugly, he was crafty, he was smelly, he was ferocious, and above all, at that particular moment in time, he was extremely angry. The werewolf man walked toward Carl from the front. His dad walked toward him from his left. The fireworks went off between all of them. It was so loud that it temporarily deafened the two humans on the scene. Nobody knows if it had that effect on the dogman, but it certainly surprised the beast. The fireworks exploding had alerted Carl's father to the presence of the monster, which he had not noticed before the explosion. He and the monster both regarded each other in confusion for a while, until the werewolf man decided to return to his original plan and began marching on his hind legs, purposely toward Carl. The boy backed away in horror, and his father ran toward him, trying to reach him before the monster did. It's a testament to Carl's father's intense form of discipline that instead of running to his father's arm for rescue, Carl ran away from both pursuers. While Carl's dad watched, stunned, his son ran away from him into the woods, and the dogman followed. Carl's father thought about running after them, but reasoned that the boy had disobeyed me, and that this was probably nature meting out a just punishment. Fathers in those days were almost as heartless as, let's say, the mainstream media is today, although not quite that bad. When he went home and told his wife what his son had done, she never questioned him as to where the boy was. He was being punished, that's where he was. She continued with her morning routines, since now, with one less child to help her, there would be even more work for her than she had already become used to. Carl ran through the woods past the sharp thorn bushes and harsh environment, which tore at him, tripped him, and troubled him greatly because he knew that if he stopped, the immense bear-like dog behind him was likely to do far worse. Finally, Carl made his way back toward his family's home, thinking he might have gotten away from the werewolf man. Instead, the monster had taken a different route through the trees and came out the same time as the boy, although from an entirely different location. Seeing this, Carl screamed, but could still only barely hear himself. The wolf being howled, but the boy didn't hear that at all. He thought he heard another firecracker going off, but Carl's ears were still ringing, so he couldn't tell from where. Looking behind him, he saw that the dogman had stopped pursuing him and had run off, re-entering the woods at a fast pace. Looking in front of him, Carl saw why. His mom had gotten out her husband's Winchester and fired it directly over the monster's head, scaring it off. Carl ran home and hid in a corner, shivering. The story is different from then on depending what the point of the storyteller was. Maybe Carl got punished worse. Maybe he was just made to go do his chores. Maybe he was left alone unpunished because the sight of the dogman had turned all his hair white and driven him completely insane. In none of the versions was he ever forgiven for his misdeeds, and in all of them he was punished severely. Make no mistake, this was a cautionary tale meant to scare us kids straight. I never found out if any of this was actually true. I never even found out if great-great-great-uncle Carl was a real person or not. But I have found out, since my childhood, that other people have reported seeing similar things out in the woods of Pennsylvania. So even though I never believed any of this when I was a kid, now, as an adult, I wonder long and hard if there might have been any truth to the stories of the 4th of July, Allegheny, Dogman. Werewolves in the Bronx? Dear Scary Stories NYC, I listen to your show a lot. I'm from NYC like you. But when you say you never saw a cryptid because you live in New York and they don't live there, I have to disagree with you. There are definitely cryptids in New York City. I mean, you're not going to find the Loch Ness Monster here. But you can find shapeshifters. Or more likely, they can find you. I'll tell you a story that happened to me back in the bicentennial year of 1976, on the night of July 4th. So, do you know the projects that start over at the corner of Burke and Bauk? Google Maps tells me that they're called Eastchester Gardens, but I only ever remember anyone calling them the projects. It's also telling me that this neighborhood is called Laconia, but I grew up here, and I never heard that word before in my entire life. Anyway, that was where my Dogman story took place. Or werewolf story, I guess I should say. I was 17 that year. Or actually, I turned 17 in August. So I would have been 16 on July 4th, 1976. I had managed to buy myself some fireworks, which are illegal in the Bronx, and I was very excited to set them off. I needed a place where I wouldn't get in trouble for it, though, where my parents wouldn't find out that I had done this. A friend of mine tipped me off to a little house, tinier than any other house in the neighborhood, where a little old lady with dementia lived. Back then we called her a senile. I never met her, but I was told that you could play in her backyard or set off fireworks there, because she was too old and feeble to do anything about it, except yell at you from her chair inside. While I didn't like the idea of bothering an old lady, I did like the idea of a safe backyard to set my fireworks off in. Looking at Google Maps, I'm amazed to see the house that I'm talking about. There it is. You can see how it must have been built much earlier than the ones around it. It's clearly from another time, and it looked like that even back then, especially right across the street from the projects as it is. That image is from February 2022. Oh, but when I pull back from street view to satellite view, we can see that the house is completely gone now. Wow, I'm glad I'm writing this memory down for you now while the street view images are still online, so you can see basically what I saw that night. The realization of the passage of time can hit you emotionally sometimes, and even though that little old lady passed on a long time ago, seeing her house gone as well kinda hits me hard in the heart for some reason. But in those days, I would have been even happier if her house had been an empty lot, since I was looking for a place to blow up some M80s. We were told that those things were a quarter stick of dynamite. I have no idea why boys and young men are so attracted to things that can accidentally explode your hand off, but that's the way it is. I knew a kid in school with half his pinky amputated because of a fireworks accident, but I still saved up my money to get 4 M80s to blow up on July 4th. That was just who I was at that age. So anyway, I snuck away from my family, and I made my way over to Bauk Avenue, where the little old lady lived in her tiny yellow house across the street from the big apartment buildings. I hopped the fence and walked to her backyard, and I could hear her screaming from her chair, just as I had been warned that she would do. She never left the chair, which was also just as I had been told. When I reached her backyard, I started getting set up to blow off my explosives in the direct center of the yard. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I got surrounded by these two guys, one in front and one behind. They were speaking to me with Puerto Rican Bronx accents, and they were asking me what I was doing in this lady's backyard, but in English, not in Spanish. I stood up quickly, and I wanted to see who they were before I answered anything. I stupidly hadn't prepared anything smart to say in this sort of situation, so I also needed to stall for time. When I saw the face of the guy in front of me, though, it didn't make any sense. I was looking at the head of a wolf or something, but this was a guy, bigger than me, wearing a black leather jacket, but his head wasn't human. I turned around quickly. I was even more surprised to see that the guy behind me also had a wolfen kind of head. He bared his teeth at me, revealing these long fangs, like you'd see in a tiger. I couldn't tell if he was wearing a mask. I wanted to run from him, but I couldn't run from either one of them. The guy behind me reminded me that I had been asked a question. I still didn't have any answer though, so I just started pleading with them not to hurt me. I told them how much money I had on me, and I said they could have it. They both started laughing and saying they didn't want my money. That was a relief. This wasn't a mugging. So what did they want? While I was looking at the guy behind me, the one in front said, "We want your blood." When I turned to look at him in shock, the guy behind me said, "That's right. We're gonna drink your blood and make you into an hombre loco like us." They were both snickering, so I couldn't tell if they were serious or if they were just trying to scare me. They never spoke when I was looking directly at them, I remember. I don't know how they could have spoken anyway, because they did not have human mouths, but canine ones. I fell to my knees and begged them not to do it. I forget what I said, but I'm sure it was pretty pathetic whatever it was. I just wanted to live. I promised them anything. I told them they could have my M80s. One of them stepped on the back of my neck and pushed my face down into the grass. "You're gonna swear to us that you ain't gonna bother this old lady here anymore to start with," a voice up over my head said, as a boot heel pushed down and made me taste dirt. I tried to swear, but it was hard to talk in that position. I mean, I'm not complaining. I made it almost to age 17 before I found out the taste of dirt and grass. So really I was lucky. I wasn't feeling lucky in that moment, though. They tossed a paper notepad and a big pen onto the ground next to me, then started barking out orders of what they wanted me to write down. My name, my address, both my parents' names, my school, what grade I was going into in the fall. I forget what else. These days they could have found out more on Facebook, but back then I felt savaged and ravaged, like they had robbed me of all my private information. They knew where to find me, and they knew who my parents were. They stood in the dark, talking in Spanglish about telling my parents what they had caught me doing, and I got pretty scared. Ultimately, they kept my M80s and sent me packing, with nothing more than a sore neck and the taste of worms in my mouth. I consider myself lucky. I got captured by werewolves, but I got off with only a warning. Seriously, that was the night I learned to respect other kinds of religions. I know those two guys were into some kind of magic, and that's how they were shapeshifters. They had to be some kind of wizards or something, which meant they were part of a tradition of some sort of magical system. I'm being vague because that's all I know on that subject. I don't know if I'm speaking about Santeria or what, so I'm just gonna try to remain vague. Was it possibly a Native American kind of magic they were using? I guess so, maybe. Those two definitely knew how to do things back then that I've never learned myself in all those years since. Someone must have taught them that. And I would guess that someone was either across the street in those projects, or else was a relative of someone that was. And here they were looking out for this old white lady, just because she couldn't look out for herself. They were practicing vigilante policing, but I was being a punk-ass jerk to that old lady, and I deserved worse than what I got. So yeah, there are cryptids and monsters in the city too. I should know, because I personally ran into werewolves in the Bronx. My grandfather's 4th of July dogman encounter. Dear Scary Stories NYC, My grandfather, God rest his soul, was the first person I ever knew who told me that werewolves were real. I think he was talking about the dogman. He told me that werewolves live in the woods of Pennsylvania, and he wasn't telling me this information in a way meant to scare me. He told it to me in the same way that he would explain to me why America is the single greatest achievement of humanity, and that it will forever have to fight against those who hate freedom and want to rule over us. To him, the fact that a werewolf can exist out in the woods was just a fact. But it was a fact based on a personal experience that he had long before I was born. Grandpa was a young man when this happened, sometime in the middle of the 60s, most likely 1965. He was with some other friends his age, and they were at Keystone State Park for July 4th. One of them had brought a rowboat to the lake, and the four of them decided to row down the long lake toward the area where a fireworks display was going to happen. They were hoping to get to watch the fireworks reflecting off the water to get a double effect, if they could find the right place to watch from. At any rate, they had to pass by some dark and desolate places on shore that night before they got to where everyone was gathering to watch the show in the sky. Grandpa said his girlfriend was getting creeped out and told the boys to paddle harder and faster. Then his friend's girl screamed, and everyone looked on shore to see a kind of creature that none of them could immediately put a word to. In their world at that time, a werewolf meant Michael landed in a school team jacket with fur glued to his face. It was a spooky character from a black and white movie. It wasn't something real. Grandpa usually called it a monster, but when he described it, that sounded like a dogman to me. What he said they were seeing was the size of a very tall football player, but it did not appear to be human. It had a head shaped more like a wolf head, with tall pointed ears on top. They could make out the eye shine even from the middle of the lake, where they were, and the creature looked angry at them, for whatever reason. I asked what it was wearing, but Grandpa said that this was an animal. It was wearing its birthday suit, he said. It was covered in fur, but not in clothing. By the time he was telling the old story to me many years later, Grandpa did sometimes refer to it as a werewolf, because he said it somewhat resembled the creatures in The Howling, which was a movie we saw together in the theater. And those were werewolves in that film. But when this originally happened to him, The Howling was still decades away, so he and his friends didn't and couldn't make that reference. To them, that was a monster on the shore of Keystone Lake, and it was pacing their boat as they rowed, staring at them intently. Grandpa's friend insisted that it was staring at the girls, which only made the two of them panic. And when the beastman walked out closer to the shore to get a better look, the girls started screaming for help. There were less people around there than usual, since everyone was heading to the same place they were. Nobody heard their screaming, except for the dogman, that is. He heard it, and it seemed to hurt his ears, so he made this sound sort of like a deep-voiced dog howl to express his displeasure. But the girls screamed even louder, and the dogman flew into a canine rage. It ran toward the shore, running out into the water on its hind legs, then diving forward and swimming like a young Mark Spitz, straight for Grandpa's boat. I remember once making a kid's joke about it doing the doggy paddle, and Grandpa paused to make certain that I understood. He was not joking around with this story. This was an animal in the woods of Pennsylvania, which had a body similar enough to a human that it could literally swim like we do. At first the boys tried paddling even harder to try to get away from that thing, but it was able to swim faster than they could propel the rowboat, and it soon caught up. The girls scrambled to the far end of the little wooden boat, with the boys taking turns trying to whack the dogman with their oars, mostly very unsuccessfully. It took too long to pull the oar back and take another shot, and the dogman was able to simply dive underwater to prevent being hit hard by either one of them. The boys were getting tired, but the manic dogman seemed to only be getting started. Grandpa said that the creature would fight with its mouth and teeth, the way many canines do, but that it also had what he called bare claws with thumbs. I took that to mean it had hand-like paws with claws, as he said it would sometimes try to grab the paddles away from them, using both its jaws and its claws. That seemed to imply that it could hold things with those paws. In fact, I'm certain that's what he meant by that term, bare claws with thumbs. One of the aspects of the encounter which really shook my grandpa up was the way that the creature's eyes seemed lit from within. He said at first it seemed to be eyeshine, but when they were battling at close range in the boat, the eyes continued to maintain that bright glow, which made no sense in that context. The creature was lit as well as they were in that instance, so why did its eyes still appear so bright? I can't answer that question, and I know it unnerved Grandpa until the day he died. The creature got one human-like arm over one side of the craft, and momentarily lifted its horrific head out of the water for all four of them to see. Grandpa said it looked as though the thing had a dark red, almost black skin under that fur that might have been brown when it was dry, but it looked black in that dark boat on that hot night. He told me that he hadn't believed his friend earlier when he had been ranting about how the creature wanted the women, but when the beast had its head out of the water, something happened to change his mind. According to my grandfather, the dogman's eyes looked over his friend, then him, then his friend's girlfriend, and then when those eyes finally came to rest on Grandpa's girlfriend, they grew wide, and his mouth widened too. Then its tongue fell out of its mouth, and all I can assume is that it was drooling over that woman that almost became my grandmother. Now, in what sense he was drooling over her is a question left open to history, because Grandpa says he got mad and whacked the monster right on the noggin, causing it to slip back into the water and have to start over in its attempts to get into the boat. Just then, the fireworks show started, with bright lights flashing in the sky, and huge deep booming sounds echoing all around the area. The dogman's eyes widened at this human witchcraft, and he dove under the water, swimming away to some place that none of the four of them could see. The attack from the dogman was over, but none of them knew for how long. The boys returned to paddling, and the four of them enjoyed the fireworks show as well as they could. While there, they ran into a couple in another rowboat that they recognized, and who also happened to be returning in the same direction after the show was over. They agreed to paddle back alongside Grandpa's boat, since they said they had felt strangely nervous on the way over there that night. They said they felt like they were being watched, and Grandpa's crew just nodded silently. No need to share their story in that moment. It might only make the trip back that much harder. Well, that dogman had beat it for parts unknown, and they weren't bothered by him on the return voyage. They went back to the area on vacation days for years afterward, and they never saw the Beastman again. Grandpa's opinion was that he didn't think it usually came around that lake, and it was most likely just a fluke encounter that won't ever repeat. But he did believe that if you walk out into those woods beyond where humans like to vacation in Pennsylvania, well then you are likely to come across not only Dogman, but Bigfoot, and some mysteries even stranger than those two. Grandpa told me that the woods are a different world from the town, and that I should always remember and respect that about it. I don't think I really fully got what he was saying when I was young, but his words still echo in my mind and heart to this day, and I'm grateful he shared his July 4th encounter with me. Hope you enjoyed it, and Happy Independence Day. The Booger Dog Bearcat of Busick Road in Missouri. And in all the multi-state Ozarks area, there are legends of the Ozark howler, the whistling wampus, the wampus cat, the devil cat, the santer, the what is it? Some people say these are all separate monsters, but I say they're all one thing. They are the booger dog, and they are the bear cat. They are a creature which defies description, yet still is seen and heard. It's said to look like a dog, sometimes a headless dog. Those who see its face, though, which is held low to the ground, say it is a large cat with a dog-like or bear-like body. Sometimes it's described as having horns or antlers on its head. Other times, it's described as walking bipedally. Some witnesses have claimed it has long tusks or saber teeth, while others say that what look like teeth from a distance are revealed at closer range to be a long, mustache-like beard extending down below the chin on either side of its mouth. In my family, who have lived in Missouri for generations, we listen to every story we can about these creatures, and yet we all agree this is one kind of animal, seen in different stages of its life and mistaken for various cryptids. It's a shaggy thing, and it grows darker as it grows older. The adult males can have horns or antlers on their heads, and they are shaggier than a cat, which makes them resemble dogs, especially from a distance. When they stand bipedally, they can only walk for short distances, not unlike a bear. The standing is generally done, it seems, either to frighten something threatening the creature, or else to get a better view of something from a distance. In all the stories we have heard, the creature never walks more than 4 or 5 steps before returning to all fours, but I have no doubt that, given enough reason, certain of the animals could probably learn to do more than this. Some gorillas held in captivity and bears trained to walk upright in exchange for food have become better walkers because they were rewarded in one way or another for improving these skills. So to think of all these wampus creatures as being unable to learn or evolve would be wrong, and to assume they all behave in the same way as each other would also be a grave mistake. If you've ever spent much time around any kind of animals, then you've learned that their personalities are as random as our own. What works to soothe one dog might anger another one. Same as with people. This cryptid we're describing comes from a somewhat intelligent species. With intelligence comes complexity, and with complexity comes a variety of reaction to similar stimuli. In other words, although the wampus cat, booger dog, or what is it, are probably names for the same species, they may as well all be from different ones, as their individual personalities make each encounter with any of them a very unique experience. Although my family, as I said, have heard many stories over decades about this cryptid, only one of us has actually ever encountered one of them. That would be my uncle, who I will just call Uncle in this to preserve his privacy. Uncle told me this story last year and claimed it happened in 2017, so this is a fairly recent incident. There is a protected wild area in Highlandville, Missouri, called the Busick State Forest and Wildlife Area. Uncle was hiking in this forest, walking along a one-lane dirt path called Busick Road. There was forest on either side, and he was enjoying a beautiful, sunny day. Ahead of him, he heard what sounded like someone whistling. He listened, curious if he was hearing a bird, a human, or something else. Soon, the whistling sounded more like a woman screaming. How can whistling sound like screaming, he wondered. Then he remembered the stories of the whistling wampus. Afraid to move forward, but too curious to leave, Uncle kept listening until he saw a cat-headed dog as large as a bear cross the road from his left to his right, then disappear into the brush. He said it was dark, almost black, and that its fur was long and shaggy like some kinds of dogs. It did not have horns or antlers, so it was likely an adult female. Maybe the sounds he had heard were those of its offspring, or maybe those sounds were warning noises from the adult female herself. She walked with her head very low to the ground, and he could see how someone witnessing such an animal walking behind bushes might interpret it as seeing a dog with no head. Backing up slowly, Uncle beat a retreat as quietly and calmly as he could manage. When he got back to where he came from, Uncle could hear the thing screaming and howling in the woods behind him, and it sent a chill through his entire body. He told me he encountered a young couple about to head down Busick Road, and he warned them about the wampus down there, that they should camp in a different area. They laughed at him until they too heard the creature bellowing off in the distance. Whatever this cryptid is, I don't think it's a magical or supernatural thing. I assume it will eventually be caught and identified by science. I hope that happens in my lifetime, because I have an intense desire to know what it was that I saw on that day, and what the true nature is of the booger dog or bear cat of the Ozarks. Hey, it's 4th of July week, and we're trying to spread the word about this cool and fairly recent book called The United States of Cryptids by J.W. Ocker. If you've got gas in your tank and you're looking for some monsterific places to drive to, this book is filled with them. And it's pretty much guaranteed to have some kind of monster or ghost or dogman or Bigfoot or swamp booger or something within driving distance of you. This author spent years traveling to each of these places, and he loves all monsters equally. We have a link to pick up a copy of this book in the description, and if you use that link, this channel makes a commission. And for those of you who are driving around this holiday week, please do so carefully. We prefer for our viewers to stay safe and healthy. Speaking of which, prayers this week for our channel member James Fleming, who is in for surgery. I have no idea what's up with him right now. I hope we hear from him soon. Up next, a story from our very first July 4th episode, now deleted. I was still kinda learning how to read stories at that point. Someone was recently requesting that we bring back music and sound effects. Well, this one has both. Dogman, on the 4th of July, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. This is a story that happened over 50 years ago when I was 12 years old. It was the summer of 1966 and it was the hottest 4th of July I can ever remember. I'm certain it was over 100 degrees that day in our little town in Pennsylvania, although I'm not sure exactly how to look that up on the internet. I just remembered that our church picnic was moved indoors due to too much sun instead of too much rain. I wanted to go swimming or stay in the bathtub all day. I didn't want to have to move at all, but my mother was making me help her pack food into our station wagon that we were bringing to the picnic. The day was just so hot that it was almost like being asleep while you were awake. I remember thinking that this must be a lot like what hell was like, and I wondered what our town had done to deserve this. So the good part was that the church hall we moved the picnic into had air conditioning. The bad part was that the pastor hadn't anticipated us using the building, so he had not turned the air conditioning on. My dad succeeded in getting it to come on, but now it had to cool the place down, and more warm bodies were showing up by the minute to heat the place right back up again. The pastor told us all we could do was set it on maximum and pray, so that's what we did. Once I had finished my chores, I set about finding ways to not play with all the other kids there. I don't remember why, but I didn't like them very much at the time. I remember finding a chair by an air conditioner and hogging the cool air for myself while gazing out the next window. It was so bright out there, it was almost like another planet in a science fiction movie. I remember seeing things and not being sure of what I was seeing. Was that a dragonfly that just glinted in the sun and blinded me? What kind of bird just cast that shadow on the window as it flitted past? I knew I was seeing stuff outside the window, but I was aware that I couldn't be certain what that stuff was exactly. And then I caught sight of something that was exceptionally strange. In the woods, I could see something that shouldn't be there. I could see a wolf, but it was very dark or black, and it was standing on its hind legs somehow, staring at the building I was in. I walked away from the cool air conditioning breeze and directly in front of the window. I placed my fingertips on the glass absent-mindedly, but withdrew them quickly when I discovered how hot the glass had gotten. My quick motion drew the attention of that thing out there. It most certainly wasn't a figment of my overheated imagination. It was something real. But it couldn't have been a wolf standing on its hind legs, could it? I cupped my hands around my eyes to block out as much of the excess light as I could, and I squinted my eyes at the dog thing. The more I looked, the more it looked like a wolf standing on its hind legs. How could it be doing that? I called my father over and I pointed it out to him. It took him a while to see what I was talking about, but when he did, I could see his expression change. Then he squinted even harder at it. I guessed he was trying to convince himself he wasn't seeing what he was seeing. He insisted to me that this was a dog and it was leaning on something. It was only standing up to get a better view of us because it was curious. Maybe it smelled our food and was hungry. That was all. It was nothing to be afraid of. His voice didn't sound as certain as his words. I asked him if we could go outside and get a closer look at the dog, and he said no so loudly that people turned around and stared at him. Embarrassed, he made an excuse to go somewhere else, and I went back to squinting out the window at the dog, somehow standing there on its hind legs, without leaning on anything. How was it doing that? I really wanted to know. I thought about going out there alone, but it looked like a pretty large dog, and I couldn't be sure it wouldn't bite. The indoor picnic lasted into the night, and then was to come the fireworks show. In those days, at least in our town, fireworks shows weren't the professional events you see these days. Generally, it was all the fireworks that the pastor and my father and a few of the other dads had collected, and they'd set them off and we'd all yell and cheer. Very primitive by modern standards, but we kids looked forward to it almost as much as Christmas. That night, I suddenly was no longer in the mood to see fireworks. I asked my father if I could watch the fireworks from inside. He laughed nervously and said, "No, of course not. I wouldn't be able to see them from that angle. Then he glanced out the window and I know he could see that thing still there. He went outside and I walked behind him and my mom. Whatever that thing was wouldn't attack a whole group of people, would it? The adults got to setting up and the kids got to acting like jerks, but I was interested only in one spot in the woods. One spot where I could still make out a very tall, very dark silhouette, bobbing back and forth between the trees and watching everything that was going on. It didn't seem anyone was paying it any attention, or me either for that matter. I lost all my fear somehow and started slowly walking closer and closer, step by step, to better vantage points from which I could see the animal or whatever it was, and each time I got closer, I would stand there and stare and squint, and I could still never be certain of exactly what I was seeing. So, I would walk a little closer. Even in the night, it was still a hot day. Just standing in the night and strolling was making me sweat so much it was flying off my face and draining into my eyes, burning them with saltiness and making it harder and harder to see. So, I would walk a little closer. I was standing by the last tree that wasn't in the wood line proper, and I was peering into the woods. I could see it sometimes, or I thought I could. It seemed even taller the closer I got to it. It seemed impossibly tall, like ridiculously tall. I was getting dizzy from all this, coupled with the heat. All this excitement, as my mother used to say. This was beyond excitement. My heart was beating so fast it was like when you hold a small bird in your hands. I just wanted one good, clear look at that thing. One good, clear look and I could go watch the fireworks. Now I thought I heard sounds in the woods, in a few places, and I wondered if there could be more than one of these creatures. This was so baffling. How could something so strange be happening at our church picnic for the 4th of July? We had such an ordinary town, I had always thought. Nothing interesting ever seemed to happen there. It was a place people went after they didn't want interesting things in their lives anymore. And yet still, I could see the silhouette of something very interesting just there, hiding in the trees. And I could sense that his friends or family were now beginning to surround me. And then something grabbed me hard on my shoulder and I screamed bloody murder. I wriggled and I kicked and twisted myself until I broke away and I saw that I had been grabbed by my father. He told me to quit screaming like a baby and get back with the others. He was furiously angry and was about to lecture me, but that just made me scream and cry even louder. I just had a bad shock and then I got yelled at on top of it. I went to very loud pieces. And then something else started howling. In the woods. Something large. That stopped me from crying. And I went back to staring. So did my father. In fact, everyone shut up. My father dragged me back to my mother and told her to watch me. Then the men started lighting up the firecrackers. I remember them lecturing in a boring way before lighting the first one. Each year we'd get lectured about the history and proper usage of each different kind of firework. But looking back on it, I'm pretty sure they just made all that stuff up. Anyway, they gave out sparklers to all the kids and we lit them and it was okay, but I only wanted to do one because it was too hot to be holding fire in front of your face. I really wanted to either shine a bright light on those woods or else go home where I felt it was safer. Looking back on it, we lived maybe 8 blocks from that church, so I guess my entire childhood, there might have been these large dogs walking around without me ever realizing it. I guess safety is never really anything but an illusion, is it? They did a Roman candle next after lecturing us about it, and I could swear I heard a strange noise from the trees. Like a motorboat or something? It was an angry sound, possibly one or more of the creatures growling or snarling, but I am operating on memory and wasn't sure what I was hearing at the time. I don't think anyone else noticed that noise. Then, my father wanted to set off some loud fireworks. He always filled the middle of the show with the most terrifying big booms. My mother and I hated this part of the show. She was convinced he was going to blow his body to pieces, and I was convinced he was going to deafen me. This year he only set off a few smaller firecrackers when that same howling came out of the woods, only much louder and longer than before. Made everyone stop again, and judging by the expressions I saw on people's faces, I wasn't the only one thinking about heading home. My father was undeterred, however. He didn't get too many chances to blow things up, and no giant dog wolf thing was going to spoil his fun. He set off something in a metal trash can. It must have been a half stick of dynamite or something. When it blew up, the can lifted off the ground and small projectiles flew in every direction. The force of the blast beat you in the chest like the punch of a 70-foot giant. One of the pebbles or shards coughed up by the explosion shattered a window of the church. Until a sound just as loud as the explosion but utterly biological in origin came out of the forest. It was like getting battered in a sonic fashion. If sound could be matter, that's what it felt like. A sound so loud it pushed you back as it passed you. It literally hurt to hear. That's how loud this sound was, and yet it was a scream. It had to be that dog thing from before. My father had just succeeded in getting it mad. Everyone's attention was on the trees as they parted, and out walked the tallest creature I ever hoped to see. It was like giraffe tall. It was not naturally tall. It was bizarre in appearance. It was so dark, and yet in most ways its features resembled a timber wolf. Its eyes were very large and yellow-orange. He was baring extremely long, scary-looking teeth at us and holding his claws out in front of himself in a menacing fashion. It looked like it definitely wanted us to understand that we should not be happy that he just showed up. He definitely looked as though he would prefer if we all ran away, screaming. And, to the best of my memory, we obliged. The rest of the night is a jumble of confused memories for me, but I do remember me and my father going back there the next day to meet the pastor and some of the other fathers and look around in the woods where the creature had been. They kept calling it a bear dog, and the pastor was convinced it was a new species that they had discovered. He was very excited and seemed to be acting like this was just us learning more about God's world. I felt like we saw this creature right on this spot one day earlier in broad daylight, or my father and I did, so standing around in the same area without any weapons was probably a dangerous thing to do. I was on high alert, looking around me in every direction, but the adults were acting as though they were inspecting an exhibit in an air-conditioned museum. I remember thinking the adults act like the adults in the Batman TV show. I lived in a world where any second we might have to fight off an attack from a dogman. But we didn't. Not that day. We did see dog tracks that the adults said were very large. They seemed quite impressed with the dog tracks, but they just looked like dog tracks to my 12-year-old eyes. I didn't really know what a large or small track should look like. I had nothing to compare it to. I had never had a dog of my own. I don't remember anyone taking a plaster cast or even a Polaroid photo of the dog prints, so I'm not sure how they thought they were going to prove they had identified a new species. The pastor eventually gave up, saying he was going to talk to experts, and people eventually ended up forgetting about the dog that stood on its hind legs after a while. It never showed up again, so people made up ideas to try to explain it. The dog had rabies or some other disease that drove it mad and made it walk on its hind legs. Maybe the dog injured its front legs and that was the only way it could still walk. Maybe it was so large because it was a wolf-dog hybrid. Maybe it really was an undiscovered species, but maybe it was the last of its kind and we saw it on its dying day. Maybe. All I know is, looking back on it, I would say that was the 4th of July on which my town saw itself a genuine, 100% real, living, breathing, screaming dogman. We'd like to thank Mr. John Carnagan from right here to Copenhagen. Please join us in welcoming back John Carnagan to our channel memberships. John gets to see our secret, uncensored, scary dogman stories, and so can you if you listen to our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Thank you. Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button. Or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.